This is an e-Psychotherapy podcast on the topic of procrastination. My name is Claudia Mastache, and we are privileged to have with us today author David Parker, who has written a book on the topic of procrastination. David is not a mental health professional, however, he has considerable life experience with this topic. David, welcome to our podcast. It really is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Claudia. It's a pleasure to be here.
David, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do in life so that our listeners could become more familiar with you?
Thank you, Claudia. Yes, well, my name is David Parker, and I live here in Brooklyn, New York. I've written a book on the subject of procrastination, and my book is titled The More You Do, the Better You Feel: How to Overcome Procrastination and Live a Happier Life. And besides having written my book, well, I formerly worked in the music business. I worked behind the scenes in the music business where I worked with some recording artists, promoting them. I was a record promoter and I was a talent scout. Later in life, I found that, well, all my life I suffered with mental depression. And during a low point, I discovered that my habit of procrastinating over things that I needed to do was making me miserable, and it was making my depression worse. So I worked on myself and I found the way to overcome my procrastination, which I'll talk about with you and your listeners a little later. And my depression lifted to the point where I decided to share my story in the form of a book. And I help people with my book, and I also do some coaching on procrastination over the telephone.
Oh, thank you, David. You have mentioned that you've written a book called The More You Do, the Better You Feel: How to Overcome Procrastination and Live a Happier Life. Can I ask you what inspired you to write a book about overcoming procrastination?
Well, that's a great question, Claudia. Thank you for asking it. You know, my life as a depressed person used to be miserable and sad, gloomy. I was very seriously depressed. And when I discovered this link between my habitual procrastination and my mental depression, my aim was to improve my life by overcoming my procrastination. And when I overcame my procrastination, I felt so much better that after a year of practicing the method, I came up with a simple method called the j.o.t method, j.o.t, which means just one task. When I learned to focus my thoughts on one task at a time, I felt so much better that after a year of practicing my j.o.t method, I decided that my mission was to help people, and the best way to do that was to write a book. So that's what I did. It took me 7 years to write my book, but I did it.
Wonderful. And David, you mentioned in your book that you were a chronic procrastinator. How long would you say you have been struggling with procrastination, and why do you think you were faced with that challenge?
You know, I hate to say I grew up in a household that was quite challenging. My parents were people who had difficulties in life, difficulties communicating, and my only defense as a child was to procrastinate. When they told me to do something and the manner in which they told me was, I would say now, not suitable for a child. There are very few options a young child has. Maybe when you get old enough, you stay away from home as long as you can, or you just say, no, I won't do it. I won't do it. And so I developed procrastination as a coping mechanism. Unfortunately, it was not a good coping mechanism. Therapists would call it a maladaptive coping mechanism, meaning it's a way of coping, but it's not a good way. And so that followed me way past childhood into adulthood to the point where even though my parents were eventually in Florida and eventually they both passed some time ago, I continued my procrastination because it was the only way of life that I understood. And so I procrastinated on things that would have benefited me in my own life. And this is a struggle that many people have in different ways. In some ways, it's a very simple psychological problem. So I was a chronic procrastinator for decades until I found out that my procrastination was making me very sad and very unhappy. And that's when I decided to try to overcome it.
And David, under what circumstances did you first hear about the word procrastination?
Straight from my mother's mouth. My mother would constantly say to me, David, you're procrastinating. Why are you procrastinating? And it was like, unfortunately, and I hate to say this because in some ways she was a very sweet person, but the only way that I could fight back was by procrastinating. So the more she didn't like it, the more I did it. That's a natural thing that children will do under certain conditions.
Mhm. David, and how, being a chronic procrastinator, how were you able to win over procrastination and write a book?
That's an excellent question. The answer to that is a long answer, but I'll try to make it as short as possible. When a person is a chronic or habitual procrastinator, you have so many tasks that you haven't taken care of. For example, my living space was always a terrible mess, and I had piles of paper stacked one on top of another. I used to call these piles of paper birds' nests because they were like the nests that a bird would make in a tree. And when I would have a big stack of papers, as a good procrastinator, what did I do? When the stack became too large, I started a new stack. That is how I lived life. I would balance my checkbook once every 9 to 12 months, and I would live off of the ATM machine balances and hope that the bank never made a mistake because I never really knew how much was in my checking account. So my life was very, very fragile in a way. My life was, I just was always sad thinking that every time I come home to this mess of an apartment, and yet I did not have a way to deal with my tasks because, Claudia, what would happen is I would wake up one morning and say, on Saturday morning, I'm going to clean this place up once and for all. And then Saturday would come along and I'd wake up and I would look at the mess and I would go, oh my God, I don't know how to deal with this. So here's the solution. I'm just going to put the television on for 5 minutes to see what's on later. And what would happen? I would wind up keeping the television on the entire day until it was time to go to bed. And I would never get anything done. There were other things that I used to do as a procrastinator. I would take a walk and I would wind up, instead of taking a short walk to the grocery store, I would take a walk for 2 or 3 miles in my neighborhood just to get away from my place. So I was a habitual procrastinator. What I had to learn to do was to stop thinking about all of the tasks that were undone. What I needed to learn to do was how to focus on just one task. I had to force myself, and I mean that, force myself to sit down with a piece of paper and a pen and write down one task, not 10 tasks or 20 tasks or more tasks than that. Because every time I did that, I would cause myself to suffer a panic attack. A panic attack is when your anxiety goes out of control and then you can't do anything. So I had to teach myself to focus on just one task. So what I would do is, Claudia, I would write down that task and then do it. I had to force myself to not make a telephone call, not put the TV on, not make food. I had to write it down and then do it immediately. do the task and write down a task that's doable. Don't write down a task like reorganize the big closet. No, 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 no. You have to write down a single task and then you do it immediately. And then, right after doing the task, I put a line through it because this is my way of tapping myself on the shoulder and saying, "Good, David, you did good." And so I had to learn that it was better to get, let's say, get 5 tasks done today than to get nothing done in a month. That is how I defeated my procrastination. It was only after I had practiced that method, which I call the JOT method, J.o.t. You know, J.o.t means in English both to jot, meaning to quickly write down, and in my case, it means just one task, J.o.t. So I taught myself, and this is in my book, with illustrations. I wrote down one task, then I did it, and then I put a line through it to say, good. I gave myself positive reinforcement, and then I found something else to do. And what did I do then? I wrote it down, and then I immediately took action on that task. And that is how I worked my way out of procrastination and into action. That's why my book is called The More You Do, the Better You Feel: How to Overcome Procrastination and Live a Happier Life. And I live a much happier life now than I did back then.
And how was it that you could find that secret of doing one task at a time to overcome procrastinating?
Claudia, it took a lot of patience with myself because at first I would almost grab myself, you might say, like grab myself by the shoulders, so to speak, and say, David, come on, stop this nonsense. What's with you? What is your problem? Why can't you get these things with an S, done? I had to learn to stop telling myself that I had to do 100 things a day. Claudia, it was like I was waiting for the perfect day to come out of the sky and where I would get 100 or 200 things done. I had to learn to focus on just one task. And you know, I have never been formally or medically diagnosed with what's called ADD or attention deficit disorder. However, I think maybe I do have ADD. People who have purchased my book have written to me and said that they heard about my book from someone who suffered with ADD and said, hey, you ought to read this book. It'll help you, or it might help you. And they said, you know what? Your book helped me with my attention deficit disorder. I want to say again, just as you mentioned earlier, I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a psychologist or a social worker. I have no formal background in psychology. I am a person who was a habitual procrastinator who suffered with severe depression, mental depression, and I found that by teaching myself to focus on one task at a time, I felt so much better that I decided to share my story and to help other people. And that's why I'm here.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
How moving to hear that.
Thank you.
David, and I know you are not a mental health professional, but you wrote a book about a topic that is very common in mental health. How would you define in your own terms what procrastination is?
Well, that's a great question, Claudia. Let me answer it this way. I would define procrastination as a lack of regard for the consequences of not taking action. Sometimes people ask me, isn't procrastination just laziness? And I'll say, no, here's why. You can be lazy. You could know that you need to, let's say, you have to get your taxes done by April 15th, tax day. And if you don't get your taxes done, you get all kinds of bad things happen, like you get penalty fines that you have to pay. You get interest on the money you owe the government that gets added on. So it's very definite that you must get your taxes done by that date. If a person is lazy, they may say, you know what, I'll get to it, I'll get to it, I'll get to it. I'm not ready yet, I'll get to it. But before April 15th, they get it done. Now, that's a form of procrastination, of course, but still they get it done. So with the lazy person, they still get it done. The chronic habitual procrastinator says, I can't deal with this. Why are they doing this to me? I don't like doing my taxes. Why is the government so? What do they want from me? And the person puts it off and puts it off. And pretty soon, April 15th comes and it passes, even though they know they're going to get a letter from the government. They know that when they finally get their papers together and go to the accountant and get the taxes done, the accountant's going to look at them and say, you know, you're going to get fined and you're going to get interest penalties and you know you're going to have to pay extra. Why did you wait so long? And the person goes, I don't know. This is how I am. I just can't. I fight what I need to do. And so, you know, the word consequences, which I said before, consequences, of course, is the bad things that happen to you, even though you knew that those things would happen if you didn't get your taxes. In this case, if you didn't get your taxes done by that date, that bad things would happen. So for me, active procrastination or rebelling against responsibility is when you know there are going to be consequences. In other words, bad things are going to happen by not doing what you need to do by a certain date. And that could be taxes. It could be, let's say you wake up with a toothache and you say, oh, I don't like going to the dentist. I don't like sitting in that chair. I don't like his hands in my mouth and opening and be him telling me wider, wider. And I don't like going to the dentist. And then what happens? You make an emergency appointment. You say, please, please, could you please let me see the dentist? And you go to the dentist. The dentist takes one look and maybe touches the tooth and you scream out in pain. And the dentist says, you must have been in pain for 6 months. Why didn't you come to see me earlier? And the person goes, I don't know, doc. This is how I am. That's procrastination. That's real habitual procrastination. So this is what it's all about. What I want is to help people to live a happier life by stopping their fighting with themselves and taking action and being happy about it. I want you to take the word responsibility and I want you to cut it in half. I want people to have response ability. In other words, I want you to respond, to have the ability to respond to your needs and your tasks so that you'll not have consequences and you'll live a happier life.
Mm-hmm. So, in your view, David, then procrastination is related to avoiding the consequences that not doing what you are supposed to do for your own good may have. Does that mean then that we can't procrastinate for things that we enjoy doing?
Yes, for example, there were so many times when I would lose opportunities that would have made my life happier or benefited my life because I procrastinated. For example, there were times that I heard that a favorite band, music group, or artist was going to play a concert here in New York. And I needed to either go to the concert venue or go to a record store back then to buy a ticket. This is, of course, before the internet. And I would say, okay, I'll get to it, I'll get to it, I'll get to it. But I was such a procrastinator that I would just, my mind was in this, you might call it a procrastination fog. I would avoid even something pleasurable like going to a concert because what would happen is, of course, I would either wind up trying to get a ticket and finding out that the concert was sold out, so I couldn't see it, or I would completely forget about it. And then one day I'd read in the newspaper, oh, last night there was this great concert. And I go, oh no, oh, what happened? I was supposed to go to that show. I completely forgot about it. And I wonder how many of your listeners right now are nodding their heads in agreement and saying, yep, that happened to me. And that happened to me many, many, many times. So we can even procrastinate about things or over things that we want to do because we're so used to procrastinating, it becomes our lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. And so this sentence that you came up with, the more you do, the better you feel, doesn't mean do a lot at once.
No, it doesn't. No, I've been asked that question before, and that's a very good question. So when we say the more you do, the better you feel, we don't want to put pressure on a procrastinator, because if a person who is a habitual or chronic procrastinator hears that, they could say, oh, you're going to make me do things I don't want to do, and I'd rather not deal with that at all. No, the more you do, the better you feel means it's better to get something done than to get nothing done. Because when you get nothing done, you feel terrible about yourself and you feel depressed or can feel depressed and feel lousy about yourself and lousy about the world. And you feel hopeless and helpless. And you say things to yourself like, how come my neighbor's apartment is clean, but mine is all messy? And you judge yourself against other people and you judge yourself harshly and you feel terrible about yourself. The more you do, the better you feel means it's better to take action than to lay around in a mess. We don't want you to get overwhelmed by the title. We just want you to understand. I've been told the Irish have a saying, which is move a muscle, change a thought. When you are active, when you're doing something, you always feel better. That's why I say in my book, for me, house cleaning is a mood changer. If I'm feeling low, and sometimes it happens, one of the best things I can do is get a clean cloth and start dusting. I start dusting, and first, what do I do before I dust? Do you know, Claudia, what the answer to that is? What do I do before I dust? Okay, I'll tell
You
you.
tell me.
Okay, I write it down first. I get a sheet of paper, I write the date at the top of the paper, and I write dust one of the bookshelves. I write a simple task that's doable, and then I do it. I don't make a sandwich. I don't make a cup of tea. I don't put on the television. I write down the task. In this case, I write down just one task. This is the j.o.t method. I write it down and then I do it. I dust that bookshelf, and then I go back to the piece of paper. I pick up the pen or the pencil, and I put a line through that task. And I say, good, David, you done good. Very good. Now I can do something else. I can dust off another bookshelf. I have several bookshelves here. So I can do that. And after that, maybe I'd start doing some more cleaning. And pretty soon I start to get a second thing done, a third thing done, a fourth thing done. Typically, when I get 10 or more things done, I start to feel better about myself. I start to feel like, you know, those old fashioned locomotives, you know, the big trains with the steam. And when you would see them start from a complete stop, how do they start? They're not like electric trains. They don't just go zoom. They slowly build up steam and slowly one wheel starts turning and the next wheel starts turning and slowly chug, 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 they start to move and then they slowly start to pick up steam. That's what it's like to defeat procrastination. I defeat procrastination on a daily basis. Every day I learn and I teach myself to do more. And when I do more, it means not doing nothing that day. So the more you do, the better you feel means we overcome mental depression by taking action.
Mhm. And another way to say it would be also the more you do just one task at a time, the better you'll feel.
We procrastinators are very complicated people. In fact, I like to say that my j.o.t method is a simple technique for complicated people. I can talk myself out of doing anything. It's so easy. It's second nature to me. So I need to focus my attention on just one task. To do that, I write it down. I could not practice my j.o.t method without writing it down. I've had people say to me, do you mean that every little task, no matter the tiniest little task, you write it down first? And then after doing it, even if you were to pick up Let's say you had an old paper clip on the table that you're going to throw out into the garbage. Would you actually write down on paper, throw out the old paper clip? Yes, that's what I do. I write down even the tiniest little task. I write it down first, then I do it. I'll pick up the paperclip, put it in the garbage. Then what do? I go back to the paper and I put a line through it because I'm reinforcing good behavior. I'm saying, good, David, you did the right thing. You stayed focused on your task. You completed the task. And then what do I do after that? I write down another task. And what do I do after that? I take action immediately. So this is how it works. It's like that train. I'm slowly getting my wheels turning, and it really, really works. And I practice it every day.
And have you ended up with lots of notebooks on which you write your tasks and put lines to?
Yes, I can prove it. I can send you an email with scans and I can prove it. I've been doing it for years. I don't keep every jot list, daily jot list that I do. I call it a jot list, the jot method, because I would have by now 10 loose leaf binders full of them. But I do keep many of them if I've done. Sometimes on some days, I've done actually 100 small tasks. And those days, I've kept those. I have them in a binder. It's not something I necessarily look at much. I don't, but I have them because to remind myself, hey, I'm really capable of a lot of good work if I allow myself the time to do it. And then, Claudia, we have to remember some tasks are big by nature and they need to be broken down into smaller parts. And this is something that in the past I could never do. I could never break large tasks into little pieces. It was almost impossible. Why? My parents never taught me how to do it. So I just didn't know how to do it. So I had to teach myself to break tasks. Sometimes I write down a task, and after looking at it, I say to myself, you know what? I can't do this right now. I can't do this the way I've written it. I put brackets around the task and I break it down into a smaller starting step. And I have to break it down into, and that means there's going to be, after the first step is done, which I do, and I put a line through it, then I have to write the second step. And I don't worry when I'm doing the first step, if it's going to turn out to be 10 steps, I don't worry, oh my God, how long is this going to take? Why is it so? One of the things about procrastinators is we hate tasks that are complicated. We hate tasks that are boring. We hate tasks that are time consuming. We want instant coffee always, okay? And so I've had to teach myself that sometimes work and tasks take more effort than I originally thought or estimated. And so I have to rewrite the task. And when I do the first step, I don't worry about, oh, when is this going to be done? Because that's the old me. The old me says, I don't want to do it. I don't like this. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I'd rather watch television. I'd rather eat ice cream and watch television than to do this. And what I've had to do is learn to say to that little baby David, David, calm down. This is not the end of the world. You can do this. You got this. Come on, guy. You got this. Practice the jot method. And I do that. Sometimes I get a little fussy with myself and I have to say, David, come on. Let's be adult, David, and let's get this done. And with the jot method, which helped me immensely, which is why I wrote my book, I get things done. And that's my story.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to see as well how the same task can mean procrastinating or not. Because when you mentioned that sometimes you would avoid something that you have to do and you could go out for a walk, I thought, well, but going out for a walk could also be exercising if your task in mind was to become fit and exercise. So actually, that task of going out for a walk can mean procrastinating in one case, but it could mean not procrastinating if your goal was exercising and being fit.
Yes, that's understood, Claudia. But however, what we're talking about is not going out to exercise. What we're talking about is going out to avoid responsibility, to avoid dealing with the task. In other words, what I said originally was I would say to myself, I'm going to go out and get some groceries. And instead, I decide, oh, it's such a nice day. I think I'll just take a longer walk. I think instead of just, I'll come back to the grocery store. But first, I'm going to go window shopping and take a look what's in the other stores. And then I wind up doing a mile. And then, oh, it's so nice. I might as well do another mile. And then, oh, well, I might as well walk back, but instead of walking back the same street and going to the grocery store, I walk a few blocks east or a few blocks west so that I see some different stores on the way home. And then when I get home, I'm so tired from walking, from having walked 2, 3, 4 miles. I'm too tired to do anything. That's another thing that we procrastinators do. We make excuses. I'm too tired, or I don't feel like it, or the famous one, I'll do a better job when I feel like doing it. The only problem is we never feel like doing it, so it never gets done.
Mhm. David, and you make the analogy between procrastinators and human ostriches in your book. Why do you think we become human ostriches when we procrastinate?
Well, that's a great question, Claudia. Let's first remember that the ostrich is an African bird. It's a big bird. And there's the fable or the tale of the ostrich, which is when an ostrich senses fear, what does it do? It sticks its head in the sand. Now, this is a fable, meaning it's not really true. Ostriches in Africa don't stick their heads in the sand when they feel fearful. What ostriches are really doing is, for some reason in nature, ostriches need to eat stones or little rocks and pebbles because it helps them to digest their food in their stomachs. That's how ostriches take in food and nutrients. But of course, we've all seen the picture of the ostrich with its head in the sand being the international symbol of fear and procrastination. So, what I do is I've come up with the term human ostrich to describe habitual procrastinators. Habitual procrastinators are human ostriches. We stick our heads in the sand, meaning we'd rather not deal with something, so we look in the other direction and we do something else and we pretend or we forget on purpose that we needed to take care of something. So again, what I teach in the book is for people to become response able, to become able to respond to their tasks, their responsibilities. And you know what happens is when you learn to take care of your tasks instead of fleeing from them, you build up something called self-esteem. Self-esteem is when you feel good about yourself. Instead of having low self-esteem, we have high self-esteem. I now have high self-esteem because I've overcome my procrastination problem.
And would you say that procrastination is a habit or is it an illness? What is your opinion on this issue?
I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a doctor, nor a psychiatrist, psychologist, or social worker. So I can't really diagnose, well, I can't diagnose illnesses, and I don't. So when I answer this question, I'm going to ask it as a layperson, meaning as a regular person, not as a medical professional. But I would have to say that procrastination can be a very bad habit for some people. Is it an illness? It's hard to say. You know, if a person is in a relationship, let's say there's a husband and wife, and one of them, it can be the husband or it can be the wife, it doesn't matter, is a habitual procrastinator. What happens in that relationship? Well, after time, one person assumes the role of the doer and the other person assumes the role of the victim or the procrastinator. And so the person who is a doer spends their weekends getting the groceries, doing the laundry, doing the house cleaning, taking care of the bills, taking care of balancing the checkbook. And eventually that person says, how come I'm always doing? Why am I always doing the heavy lifting? When are you going to do something? And so procrastination, the person who's doing the doing may look at the other person as, what's wrong with you? Are you sick? Are you ill? Are you incapable of? And so this ruins relationships. So when we say the more you do, the better you feel, how to overcome procrastination and live a happier life, Sometimes living a happier life means doing your fair share of work in a personal relationship or at work in the workplace. Because believe me, if you're a procrastinator, your boss is not going to be happy with you. In the workplace, procrastinators are known for two things. One is late coming, which is a very big trait of procrastinators. Procrastinators are late comers, they're never on time because they don't plan. And also, procrastinators at work are clock watchers. If work is over at 5 p.m., they're constantly looking at the clock on the wall or their wristwatch or their cell phone. They're waiting and waiting. And the moment it's 5 o'clock, they're out the door. And their coworkers say, how come this person is like this? How come I'm doing his work, or how come I'm doing her share of the work? When are they going to pull their own load? So when times become bad, who gets fired first? Well, many times it's the procrastinator. So again, I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose illness, but I would say, is procrastination like an illness? Could be. It could be in some people.
Mhm, mhm. And you mentioned fear earlier on, and fear is an emotion. And you mentioned fear as something that can help habitual procrastinators to procrastinate. Fear of what?
Well, first of all, fear grows on itself. So when you have procrastination and depression, many times you also have anxiety or nervousness. And so fear feeds into that. Sometimes when it comes to procrastination, you can be fearful that if I get this job done, that means I'm going to have to get this other job done. And then that job is going to lead to yet another uncomfortable thing. So you say, you know what, if I don't get the first thing done, then I'll feel better because I'm avoiding and I don't have to worry about those other things. This is how the mind of the procrastinator actually works. Again, we are very complicated people, which is why I came up with my j.o.t method, because as I said before, it's a simple method. It's a simple technique for complicated people. So procrastinators have a fear of getting things done because they have a fear of doing. There's it maybe also we're so used to not doing that the idea of spending a day busy and getting things done is so alien, it's so foreign to us that it's fearful. And many times, when something is new, we get fearful over it. So when you do something long enough, when you do anything, if you're learning to play a violin or playing the piano or playing a guitar or doing math, anything that you do long enough and you get better at and you get better and better. So we procrastinators become experts at avoiding. And then when we're faced with getting something done, like getting the taxes done on time, we become fearful. We become resentful, even. We become resentful against the thing that we need to get done. Again, that's why I said we might say, why does the government make me do this? Why don't they leave me alone? That's the way I used to think. So fear becomes a over encompassing, it's just one symptom, it's just one little bit, it's one brick in the wall of procrastination. There's fear, there's resentment, there's anger. There's anger at yourself, there's anger at institutions, anger at partners, there's resentments. It's a very complicated and a very psychological situation. I don't like to call it an illness, again, because I'm not a doctor, but it's a very complicated problem. But the good side is we can learn to, Claudia, there's a word in English, I'm sure you know it, I'm sure everyone knows it, it's called liability. A liability usually means, like in finances, you have the money you have, and what you owe is a liability. That's on a financial sheet. Another type of liability could be sometimes you're injured. Let's say you injure your foot and you have to walk for a while with a crutch. That's a liability. It's a difficulty. It's a disability. But there's another meaning of the word liability, and that is when we procrastinators have a great liability. We have a great ability to lie to ourselves. We have a liability. We lie to ourselves. We say, it's too difficult. Or today's not the day. Not today. Oh, no, no. Today's not the day. I'm not up to it. I don't have the energy to deal with that. Or I'm going to fight this. They can't make me do it. So we have a great liability. Our ability to lie to ourselves is a liability. It's a bad liability. We need to learn how to take action. And when we do, surprise, you feel better about yourself. You feel stronger. You don't feel helpless. You feel stronger. You don't feel hopeless. You don't feel low self esteem. You have pride. You have higher self esteem. And by the way, I would just like to mention many people who are listening right now who suffer from depression are prescribed medication. They take medication for their depression. For some people, it helps. For some people, it doesn't. But I want to again state I'm not a doctor. And if anybody listening is on medication for depression, continue taking your medication. Continue. Follow your doctor's orders. If you have any questions in medical regard to your depression, speak to your doctor or your psychiatrist. If you don't have a doctor or a psychiatrist, get one and deal with your depression in the right way because I am not a doctor. However, there are some people for whom medication doesn't seem to work. That's the way it is for me. I've tried every medication. I've been asked when I do appearances at health shows and book fairs, people say to me, "So have you been on depression medications?" And I say, yes, everything from A to Z, from Ativan to Zoloft. And those are, well, Ativan is an anti-anxiety medication and Zoloft is an antidepressant. But I say that I've tried everything. And the things that help me most for my depression, there are two things. One is taking action, not procrastinating. And the other is exercise. I go and exercise, and I hate exercising. Believe me, I'm the last person who wants to exercise. But I have to face the fact it makes me feel better. And it doesn't make me feel better thinking about exercising. I have to exercise. And when I exercise, I feel better. So, in short, if you're depressed, first, rule out any medical problems, see your doctor, get professional help. But if you feel that your procrastination may be making you feel low, making you feel helpless, making you feel hopeless, making you suffer from low self esteem, you might want to visit my website and get some more information. My website, by the way, is davidparkerauthor.com. You might find some helpful information there, or send me an email. I'll be happy to write back to you. I love getting emails.
And David, when would it be healthy or even beneficial and not problematic to procrastinate? Or when do you think people should not feel bad about procrastinating?
That's a great question, Claudia. I'm so glad you asked that. We're not machines. We're not robots. If I take a week off, if I go out of town, or if I take a day off, no big deal. I mean, if I want to catch up on some DVDs or catch up on some reading, I can't do two things at once. Again, I'm not a machine. I could do that. That's not procrastination. That's healthy living. We have to make decisions. And so we take some time off to ourselves to be with ourselves or to be with friends or loved ones. That's not procrastination, that's life. So we should not feel bad about enjoying life. When I talk about procrastination, it's avoiding, it's knowing that bad things, consequences will occur if I don't take care of something. That doesn't mean I don't have the right to go out for dinner with a friend or watch a movie or something. It's perfectly fine. What we don't want to do is then the next day say, I want to watch another DVD. No, David, I have to parent myself. I have to be my own parent and stay on top of things because it's very easy for me to still fall into bad habits. That's why I practice my jot list every day.
And it really sounds like you do have like a constant negotiation between you, parent David, and you, child David.
For some people, it's like that. There are some people who find that, let's say, one alcoholic drink a night starts to become two or more. And eventually they say to themselves, I'm too reliant. Once I start drinking, I seem to have a problem. I can't stop. And so the internal parent in them needs to take over and say, you know what? Maybe I have to live a life without alcohol or without drugs or without gambling or other things like compulsive shopping. We're human, Claudia. We're all human and we can fall into all sorts of bad habits. And procrastination is a subject a lot of people laugh about. They laugh about it, but you know what? For some people, procrastination becomes a way of life, and it's not a happy way of life. That's why I wrote my book to help those people.
And when it's not a happy way of life to be a habitual procrastinator, what do you think would be the risk of suffering from this and not seeking help?
Misery, sadness. I think that if you procrastinate like many people do, the way that I used to, imagine again, only once a year I would sit down with 12 monthly bank statements and try to balance my checkbook, and I'd go crazy. It was torture. Today, when my bank statement comes in, I balance my checkbook. Usually, I time myself just for fun. It usually takes between 5 and 7 minutes. I call the bank's telephone number. I get the balance. I look through the statement. I look through my checkbook, and everything balances out. There's never a mistake. It's done in 5 minutes, 6 minutes. It's done. When I think back about how I used to live, that I didn't really know what my bank balance was at any time. What a way to live life. Or my apartment would be so messy, I couldn't invite a friend over. Or there was actually a time when I was going to work and I realized I had no clean shirts. I had to get on the train to get to Manhattan, and I had all of my shirts were in the laundry bag. That's how long it had been since I did the wash. So I had to go through the laundry bag and find the shirt that was least dirty, frankly, least smelly, and wear that not so clean shirt to work. And I felt terrible. And I worried, will people at work smell me? Will I smell bad? And I know I'm not the only one. I know that because I've spoken to people who have bought my book, people who've been helped by my book. I know I'm not the only one. I know that there are people listening right now who are nodding their heads and saying, that's me, that's me. Now, a lot of people are like that. It's a little secret, but procrastination makes a lot of people very miserable. There are even people who procrastinate and they worry, what if one day the radiator breaks, and call the landlord and they send the plumber over? Is the plumber going to call back to the landlord and say, well, I fixed the radiator, but there's something wrong with this person because, their apartment is a terrible, terrible mess? I used to feel that way. I used to worry about things like that. I don't today.
Mhm. And talking about a happier time, what would be your message for people who are currently struggling with procrastination, seriously struggling with it? Is there any hope for them?
Absolutely. I would say a good thing would be perhaps to visit my website for some helpful information about me and why I wrote my book and what my book is about. You could also visit my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/David Parker author. Or I'm happy to say that my book has some reviews that I just can't believe some of the wonderful things that people have written about my book, how my book has actually touched people's lives and changed them for the better. And I'm so grateful, not just for those reviews, but to have read the transformative stories that people have written. Because I'm David Parker. I am a guy who went to community college. I have an associate's degree. I don't even have a 4 year, I don't have a bachelor's degree. And I wrote a book. It took me 7 years, by the way. People always ask me, so how long, you're a procrastinator, how long did it take you to write your book? It took me 7 years to write my book. And it was a struggle because it was very hard for me to focus my thoughts, but I got it done. That's the important thing. And I did not win the Pulitzer Prize or any or book of the year, but I know that my book has helped people. I also do coaching on the telephone with people who have really severe procrastination problems. You can get in touch with me. My email address is info@davidparkerauthor.com. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to write in. I'm happy to hear from you.
Well, David, these are all the questions that I had for you today. Thank you very much for your time and for all your interesting answers. I am sure that our listeners have gained some helpful information regarding this fascinating topic of procrastination. However, if our listeners have any questions or are seriously struggling with procrastination, they can reach out to Mercedes and me. Sometimes talking things through could help. If anyone is in this case, please click on the Contact Us link in the description below. So, David, I look forward to having you again as our guest with Mercedes next time.
Thank you, Claudia. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I look forward to being Mercedes' guest next time.